Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our Green Futures event today for 2021. My name is Simon Fisher and I'm the NFU Environment Advisor in the East Midlands region, and it's my privilege this afternoon to chair this webinar. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has stopped us from staging our annual series of county meetings around the East Midlands, and actually in our 10th Green Futures year, we've innovated and gone virtual with 2 webinars. Today's event will look at protecting water and managing resources. Both events have been brought together by a small steering group from the NFU and CLA regional offices, and the Environment Agency and Anglian Water and Severn Trent. Next slide, please. Our speakers today are Andrew Wells from the Farming Advice Service, who will update us on cross-compliance and greening. Graham Dixie and Ali Hyman from the Environment Agency will speak about protecting water, and Laura Flower from Severn Trent Water and Kelly Houston Fisher from Anglian Water will speak about managing catchment management and farming for water. Following their presentations, there'll be a question and answer session, and I'm aiming to close the event by 2:20. Next slide. If you would like to ask a question, either to a specific speaker or the whole panel, please use the Q&A function of Zoom at any point during the session. You may already have spotted the Q&A button highlighted on this slide at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar. I should also remind you that today's session is being recorded. Delegates to watch on demand. Both the slides and the link to the recording will be circulated after the webinar. And finally, details of how to claim the BASIS and NEROSO points from our webinars will be displayed at the end of the Q&A session. So without more ado, we'll now begin with a pre-recording of our speakers' presentations.
Thank you very much and welcome to this short update on cross-compliance for 2021. My name's Andrew Wells. I'm working for the Farming Advice Service on behalf of DEFRA with this presentation. I'm going to quickly run you through what's new for 2021 in terms of cross-compliance, and then look at some of the issues found during farm inspections. So the first thing I'm going to start with is just a clarification about greening for this year. Now, hopefully everyone's aware that there are no greening requirements in England for 2021. So that means no crop diversification rules, no requirement to have ecological focus areas, and no requirement to keep permanent grassland in England above a 95% threshold of the previous percentage. This should make cropping decisions a lot simpler for a lot of people. And obviously it completely removes the EFA requirement. I'd just like to remind you though, before you think that all permanent grassland can be removed or changed, that most of the permanent grassland in England could come under an environmental impact assessment requirement before you can change it from permanent grass to another use. So just have a think about that quite carefully. Have a look at whether that's a requirement before you could do something that you later regret doing. Moving on to the guidance for 2021, it was published online just before Christmas. The website web address is on the slide, so you can have a look at it. Essentially, the rules are the same in 2021 as in 2020, but the guidance has been revised significantly. The real changes for cross-compliance this year is how the penalties structure is going to work, and more importantly, how the verifiable standards have been changed for this year, which will reduce the number of penalties that should be applied for very minor breaches. You'll notice if you've downloaded the guidance booklet that it's a much slimmer volume this year. That's because rather than trying to outline the detail of all the rules and regulations in the guidebook, DEFRA have taken the decision that they're going to provide a link to the gov.uk website where you can access easily updatable rules and regulations and a much greater amount of detail on how to comply than perhaps they could put in a printed document. Just be aware of using the previous year's 2020 guidance, because actually that is not going to be kept up to date in real time in the same way that the 2021 with the links to gov.uk is. Another significant change for inspection for 2021 we need to be aware of is how farms are going to be selected for an inspection. We're now free of the EU rules on inspecting farms, and DEFRA have decided there's going to be a greater focus on inspections where there's a higher risk of environmental impact. My understanding of this is that they're going to look at farms where perhaps there's slurries or manures or digestate being used, which all can have quite significant environmental impacts if things go wrong. Of course, there's still going to be random farm inspections, as will a small number of inspections that are carried on as a result of a referral, whether that's from another agency or a member of public. A significant improvement for 2021, I believe, is that if you are selected for an inspection, the inspector will give you a checklist of records they'll want to see during the inspection to allow the farmer being inspected to gather the documents together to make sure they're all complete and in order prior to the inspection. This will be a big help. Another thing we should see this year during inspections is that the inspectors will be able to provide guidance and signposting to source of information during an inspection. This could be situations where maybe some of the rule compliance is quite close to the line, and the inspectors providing some helpful guidance on where you can find information on how to improve. Another thing the inspector will be looking at during the inspection is the farmer's general engagement with the rules if a breach is found. I think it's going to be particularly important that farmers are seen to engage with inspectors and understand the rules and be seen to be trying to be compliant, as this is more likely to downgrade any breaches to a level where the penalty will either be lower or a warning letter might be issued. DEFRA and the RPA have made quite a play about making the penalty structure more proportionate and actually changing the penalty structure for this year. It does come with some complications. The new penalty structure, which to be honest is very little change from the old penalty structure, will only apply to applicants who claim BPS in 2021 and if they have a mid-tier or highest tier stewardship, it's one that started in 2021. This is about 60,000 farmers making claims. Unfortunately, the new penalty structure will not apply to applicants who've got a legacy scheme. So this is a scheme that started before 2021, which has got part EU funding. So a lot of the higher level stewardship schemes, mid-tier or higher tier stewardship agreements and woodland grant schemes will be affected. There's approximately 20,000 farmers who will still be on the old penalty structure for any cross-compliance breaches. But importantly, the new verifiable standards being used in 2021 will apply to everyone. In the verifiable standards, what they've done is they've made the severity of some of the breaches much less. So quite common breaches that don't have significant impact on public or animal health or risk of landscape feature have been downgraded from a low risk to a very low risk. And this allows a warning letter to be issued to the farmer with a requirement to fix it if possible, rather than a penalty being applied. Where there's inspections taking place and there isn't a legacy scheme on the farm, the penalty structure has been improved from 1 all the way through to 5%, and there's now no longer a need for the normal penalty to be 3%, which was a European Union requirement. I wouldn't get too hung up about the penalty scheme changing. As you'll see on this slide, this is looking at the penalty structure for a negligent intent, so an accidental breach that only has an effect on the farm. And you'll see the only change here is a 1% reduction in penalty for a low severity, permanent effect on the farm. If we look at the penalty structure where it's a negligent effect and there's an off-farm effect, again, it's a 1% lower penalty for those who are in a non-legacy scheme. I wouldn't really get too hung up about it. Yes, it's a step in the right direction. The RPA want to move this further in future years. So they have made a step in the right direction. But I think the biggest impact we'll see on inspections this year is where the new verifiable standards are being used. I'm now just going to look at the latest inspection data we've got, which is from the 2019 inspections across England. Just over 12,000 inspections were carried out, and you'll see on the slide the penalties that were applied as a result of that. You can see quite clearly that the vast majority of farmers who are inspected are fully compliant. And as an industry, we've been improving in our compliance year on year, which is a credit to everyone involved in meeting the requirements and the rules. What I'm going to do is just look at the top 10 failures by number of failures across England. And you will see, those of you who've listened to me speak before, that the top 5 are probably unchanged from previous years. But it's nice to see that the number 1 failure, which is cattle identification and registration, is now below 600. It wasn't that long ago, it was over 1,000. So we have seen significant improvements over time. If I put the 2018 inspection numbers up next to it, again, you'll see how most areas have improved. In fact, 7 out of the 10 have all seen significant reductions between the 2 years, which is really positive. Few areas where the number of failures has increased. Public rights of way perhaps being the most significant. Food and feed law, a little increase, and the use of plant protection products just coming up, but very, very low numbers of breaches across the whole of the country. The industry is very compliant. I'm just going to run through some of the top 10 failures, just so you understand where people are going wrong. So if we look at the cattle failures, a big improvement from the previous year. The biggest problem still with cattle failures is reporting movements correctly and recording them. That's if there's one thing we can try and get right, it's that. Then we've got the issue of animals not being found in the farm records, or a death not being reported correctly. It's important that the animals on the farm match the BCMS records. We have a number of failures for tagging and tags being lost and not replaced. And then a few paperwork issues regarding dates of birth and identifying dams. At number 2, we've got cattle TB testing. This is an automatic penalty if TB testing is later than the required date. A big improvement from previous years. The industry is obviously getting to grips with how to get TB testing done at times. I realise there can be problems with the availability of testers and just the staff involved of getting testing done, but it's one of the few areas where a penalty is applied without an inspector being on the farm. This is an automatic penalty if it's late. Sheep and goat failures are again down on the previous years. For most of the problems with sheep are to do with records, it's movement records, recording when replacement tags are put in animals, identifying animals correctly, recording deaths, remembering to do the annual stock take. There are some failures due to tags, but mainly it's the paperwork on inspection that's the problem. The nitrate vulnerable zone failures are almost wholly due to record keeping and having complete records in place. This is one area where the new verifiable standards for 2021 may help, in that if the records are almost complete but maybe not quite complete, this is going to be classed as a very low breach, which should result in a warning letter rather than a financial penalty being imposed. There's a lot of detail required for NVZ records. If you're unsure about how to comply with NVZs, I would suggest you listen to the Farming Advice Service webinar that went out just before Christmas, an hour of purely NVZs to take you through all the rules and requirements. At number 5, we've got animal welfare. Lots of issues here, many of them quite different. Often it's to do with staff and the skill and the number of staff to prevent welfare problems. It can be sick animals not being cared for appropriately. Records in terms of medicine records comes up. Lack of a well-drained lying area for stock being kept outside is particularly challenging in the weather we seem to be experiencing most winters, and other issues, as you can see on that slide. The issue with public rights of way in at number 6 is the right of ways being, well, in official terms, willfully obstructed. Sometimes this is pure ignorance, negligence, didn't know there was a right of way there, therefore it's not being cleared across the field. Again, we should benefit from the new verifiable standards this year, that if the right of way is accessible, it's walkable, but maybe it's not quite as wide as it should be alongside a field or across a field, that should be down to a very low breach with a warning letter, an option for the inspector, providing there's suitable engagement from the person being inspected, and that they then fix it, correct it within any timescales given. Looking at the buffer zones next to hedges next, the main problem on inspection is either the buffer zones no longer wide enough because it's been cultivated, or it's been sprayed, or it's had fertilizer applied to it, or the buffer zone's still there isn't a crop on it, but it's got no green cover because materials have been stored on it. It's been used as an access track all winter by the gamekeeper, so it's a brown mess, not a green margin. There are some failures due to hedge cutting in the closed period and hedge removal, but the main bulk is looking after the buffer zones. Then we move on to number 8, which is buffer zones alongside watercourses. The first issue is having a risk map of the farm. And again, this is another area where if there isn't a risk map, it can be categorised as a very low breach, which results in a warning letter rather than a penalty. But do try and have a risk map showing the no spread areas on the farm. Then once we've got past the risk map issue, we're then onto the buffer zones alongside watercourses and making sure they're green, they're not being cultivated or sprayed or having materials sprayed on them, stored on them, sorry. Just a reminder that watercourses have a buffer zone that's measured from 2 points. So it's got to be 2 meters from the center of the watercourse and 1 meter from the top of the bank. My suggestion is that we work to a voluntary buffer zone of 1.5 meters from the top of the bank. Then everyone knows what we're leaving, and it pretty much means that you will comply with both those measurement requirements for cross-compliance. In at number 9, not a huge number of failures now, which is really good. Food and feed law. Often it's incomplete records for food production. Often this is medicine records that's not being kept, or the records are there, but they're just not complete, or they're not accessible. For the first time in recent years, I've seen penalties applied for waste or hazardous substances not being handled separately or securely. That's just perhaps one to look out for going forward. And finally, at number 10, we've got plant protection products where inspectors have had a look at the pesticide records, and they've seen that authorised products have been used not quite according to the approved conditions of use, whether this is a growth stage or dose rate or number of applications, or indeed non-authorised products being used. And this is increasingly a problem as we're losing pesticides at quite a rapid rate at the moment. So some final thoughts now. Essentially the rules are unchanged for 21, but be aware that the guidance is now presented differently. There have been some significant changes to how inspections are going to be carried out, and the verifiable standards, which leads to penalties for the majority of claimants. There's a danger of being complacent, but I think just keep yourself refreshed, keep thinking about it, because you're just as likely to get an inspection this year as you were last year. Focus on the high risk areas: cattle and sheep recording, TB testing, nitrate vulnerable zones, and animal welfare. And if in doubt, get help and ask questions. There's some great sources of information from the Environment Agency, the Farming Advice Service, and the Rural Payments Agency. Farming Advice Service helpline still operating. The details are on the slide, and our website's really useful with the ability to look back at webinars we've recorded recently to be updated. We also provide email newsletters to everyone on a monthly basis and email updates. So there's hopefully plenty of support to keep you compliant. That finishes my section, and I've got the pleasure of handing over to Graham and Ali from the Environment Agency.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. Very informative as always. Hello, everybody. It's Graham Dixie here again. Today, we'd like to update you on environmental regulations, any local issues you may need to know about, and give you a few tips on farming to protect and grow your business, your resources, and protect your environment. In the next 20 minutes or so, we'll cover farming rules for water, nitrate vulnerable zones, silage, slurry and agricultural fuel oil regulations, water resources and general contingency planning. So without further ado, let's jump into the first slide. We've spoken about farming rules for water several times over the last few years at Green Futures, and today we'd like to highlight just Rule 1. But first, a quick recap for you. The rules came into force in 2018 and designed to help farmers and landowners such as yourselves reduce and prevent diffuse pollution, as well as help meet DEFRA's 25-year environment plan. The rules are written to allow you to decide what actions to take to best prevent and reduce water pollution using your knowledge of your land. So it's up to you to decide on the right time and the right place to spread fertilisers, store manures, manage livestock, building on other regulations and codes already in place, such as the MVZ regs, cross-compliance and the Code of Good Agricultural Practice. The rules are risk-based because they require you to assess the risk of causing diffuse water pollution and to take reasonable precautions to prevent it. For example, you must assess pollution risks from poor weather, upcoming weather forecasts or soil conditions to determine what action, if any, you must take in order to mitigate against these risks. Remember, better manure, fertiliser, soil and livestock management can actually save you money and build business resilience and protect your farmed environment. Important for meeting baseline environmental standards as we move forwards towards the Environment Land Management Scheme. DEFRA reviews the farming rules for water every 3 years on a cycle. So the first consultation closed in January. You may have heard of it or responded to it even, although it will have been done probably by the NFU anyway in your area or via their website. DEFRA's report is slated for April. So let's talk about Rule 1. I said there's 8 rules to consider, but today we'll just look at Rule 1 because it is a quite important one. And that rule says that the application of organic manures or manufactured fertiliser must be planned so it does not exceed the needs of the soil and the crop on the land or does not give rise to significant risk of water pollution. And also takes into account, as I've said, weather conditions, forecasts and also the land at the time of the application. In addition, reasonable precautions must be taken to prevent water pollution from the application. So on the next slide, you can see that to comply with this rule, you'll have to demonstrate how you've planned your nutrient needs. Those of you in an MVZ will be familiar with this process, I expect. So plan what nutrients you're going to spread on the land, such as nitrogen, phosphate and potash, from such things as your manures, manufactured fertilisers, digestates, sludges and waste. Ensure that these nutrients are only applied in quantities that are sufficient to meet and not exceed the crop or soil need on each cultivated parcel of agricultural land. And that means tilled land and grassland. Ensure the nutrients are only applied at a time when they'll be needed by the crop and the soil on that parcel of land. And it may be a good idea to work closely with a FACTS qualified advisor on this planning stage. So if we move on, we can see that for spreading, there's some basic information you need to record. One way of demonstrating this is to record the high risk and no spreading zones on a map. You must also take into account any risk arising from weather conditions at the time of spreading. The location and approximate direction of field drains, watercourses including ditches and coastal waters, as well as boreholes, wells and springs must be marked. The slope of the land, especially if it's greater than 12 degrees, is also very important, as are the soil type and the condition of the land, such as soil wetness and whether it's compacted. Now, there's further details can be found about all these sort of things in the government's Code of Good Agricultural Practice, called Protecting Our Water, Soil and Air. So moving on, evidence is required on what organic manures have been spread. Now, these can include plant, animal and human-derived manures, and they may be generated on the farm or come from off-farm sources, and may be controlled in that case by an environmental permit. There's a link later to a useful NFU checklist. For each cultivated field, you should have a calculation of that takes into account crop and soil need, for example, using RB209. If a different approach is adopted over RB209, then it's prudent to speak to the agency before you do the spreading, just to check everything's okay. Your plan should be adjusted, of course, to reflect soil test results, which we'll cover a bit later in the talk. And finally, you should demonstrate what has been spread and when, and that it's in accordance with your crop and soil needs, or was not likely to cause significant diffuse water pollution. So in terms of soil testing, we can see on this next slide, it's required. You're required to have soil analysis to show that you're complying with the regulations. And what's better than having some up-to-date results? You'll need to know what the existing nutrient levels are in your soils, which also may have an economic benefit to yourselves. Use the results of your soil test for pH, NPK and magnesium for every cultivated field, including your grassland, remember. Sample results must be no more than 5 years old, but remember, if you are in an MVZ, it's 3 years, that rule. So just don't get caught out with that one. Nitrogen levels can be very changeable, so alternatively, use the soil nitrogen supply, SNS, as demonstrated in RB209, which is recognised by the Environment Agency. Get your soil samples tested in an accredited laboratory. Tried and tested, and the Soil Association list a number of providers, and the link is provided on this next slide coming up. Finally, a few words on what all this means in reality. Farming rules for water do not impose a ban on the application of any organic manures or manufactured fertilisers per se. The nutrient need of each farm and field can be different in terms of what's required and when to meet crop and soil needs. What the farmer needs to know, that's you, is that anything beyond that, or applications that pose a significant risk of pollution, are likely to represent breaches of rules 1 to 5 of the farming rules, and action may be taken. When assessing compliance, Environment Agency officers will consider organic manure and manufactured fertiliser applications and their planning on a field-by-field basis. And remember, wherever you are, if you're storing slurry, you need to comply with the silage slurry and agricultural fuel regulations. And in an MVZ, you must also follow the storage and use rules for materials containing nitrogen. So more on these regulations in the next slide or two. There's never been a greater time or need for contingency planning for exceptional circumstances. If you produce and or store your slurry. Last autumn and winter were particularly difficult with exceptional rainfall, terrible ground conditions and poor water quality. And this year is unfortunately shaping up to be a similar fashion. With SAFO turning 30, it's probably a good opportunity to remind ourselves of the practicalities around them. So let's look at the ever popular earth bank lagoons. So the legal minimum storage is 4 months, but again, it's 5 months if you're in an MVZ or 6 months if you're storing pig slurry. Planning for even more storage, though, is a great idea. Think contingencies again. And we are recommending a minimum of 6 months for all stores these days, just because of the way weather is. So SAFO covers not just new stores, but also substantially altered stores. And that includes, for example, making one that's a bit bigger. So before you start, you must contact the Environment Agency at least 14 days before you begin any construction. Apart from it being a legal requirement, it could actually save you money, as we're here to help and make sure you get it right first time. Suitable soil testing is essential for a soundly engineered lagoon that meets SAFO British standards. And you need to consider more than just permeability of your soils if you're building embankments. The best start is Sirius C759, called Livestock Manure and Silage Storage Infrastructure for Agriculture Guidance, and specifically section 7 in part 2 of that document. The links to this guide are below. So moving on, in England, looking at MVZs now, the MVZ designated areas are reviewed every 4 years, and this time round the agency's found no substantive change in the patterns of nitrate pollution in the data that we've got. MVZ designated areas in 2021 to 2024 will therefore be the same as the previous 4-year cycle, 2017 to 2020. So no one will fall in or drop out of the current MVZ areas. A map of MVZs in England can be found at the following link. And finally, there are plans afoot in DEFRA to review farming rules, SAFO and MVZ as a whole. So with the intention being that there's one single regulation going forward in the future. This can only be, I think, a good thing for everybody concerned, including yourselves and regulators. So stay tuned for that one. But now I'll pass you over to my colleague, Ali Hyman, for some more useful updates. Ali.
Thank you, Graham, and good afternoon, everyone. I cover the Links and Northants area, just across the border from Graham. Continuing on along the theme of contingency planning, remember to consider the pollution risk from plant protection products. We've continued to see a number of incidents relating to pesticides, fertilisers and fungicides over the past few years, and these products can cause serious harm to surface and groundwaters. So the first thing to remember is to report any incidents impacting the environment through to our incident hotline number, which is highlighted at the bottom of the screen. And I'll just quickly run through a couple of examples of incidents that we've dealt with recently. So the photo on the screen shows an incident involving a remote fertiliser store which was vandalised, causing 7,000 litres of nitrogen-based fertiliser to leak out. Whilst there was a bund surrounding the tanks, this wasn't impermeable, and the product soaked into the surrounding ground, eventually picking up some land drains that discharged into the nearby drainage ditches. Farm staff did take prompt action to contain the pollution to the drainage network, and thankfully it didn't impact the nearby river. However, the cleanup was a lengthy and costly process, which involved installing a treatment system to gradually reduce the levels of ammonia within the drainage network. In this next incident, a crop sprayer had been in the process of applying a fungicide to a crop when it tipped into a ditch whilst crossing a narrow bridge between two fields. When it went over, around 2,000 litres of working strength fungicide spilled out. The ditch was dry, but the fungicide pooled in the bed and soaked into the ground. This happened in a source protection zone 1, which means that the groundwater in this area is used for public water supply. Again, the farmer here had to undertake a lengthy and costly remediation involving removing contaminated soils, which is shown in the photo, and also drilling a number of groundwater monitoring boreholes to establish the impact and extent of the pollution. If the worst should happen and you do have a spill, the quicker you act, the better. But there are some things that you can do to plan ahead to reduce the risk and be better prepared. So when you're in the farm office, think about prevention, produce a risk assessment and a drainage plan. Check you know what sensitive receptors are nearby in both the farmyard and the fields where you'll be working, Are there watercourses? Is the land under-drained? Are there any environmentally sensitive sites like FRfW? And what about downstream obstructors or fisheries? And don't forget about groundwater. Is it sensitive? Are you in a source protection zone? Check the small print on your insurance policy. Does the policy cover the costs of remediation if you have a spill out in the field? And also identify in advance any emergency cleanup contractors that you could call on for assistance. In the farmyard, think about the storage being used for plant protection products. Is the store in good condition and located away from surface water drains? Do you know where your yard drains go? Could the store be bunded? And if it is, check the integrity of that bund. Is it free from cracks? Is it constructed from impermeable materials? Is there a spill kit available? And do staff and contractors know where to find it and how to use it? Do the staff know where the handling, filling and washdown areas are and where to store used containers and foils? Think about how you'd contain a spill if it happened. Could you block any drains or put in a soil dam? When you're out in the field, think about the sensitive receptors on your risk map. Farm machinery's gotten bigger and heavier over the years. Do your access tracks and bridges need maintaining or widening? And finally, share your knowledge with your staff or contractor. Is the spray operator aware of the risks and sensitivities? Have they got a copy of the risk assessment? Is there an emergency spill kit available on the sprayer? Does the spray operator know who to contact in an emergency? And is their training up to date and the equipment maintained and calibrated? Also, think about whether you need to plan a route to the field, avoiding any tight turns or weak structures. And finally, check the weather forecast. Are the conditions suitable for spraying? On this next slide, I've just highlighted some of the tools that might be useful in helping you self-assess the risks at your farm location, including Magic Maps, Check for Zones, and the Catchment Data Explorer. Your local council has information on private water supplies, and remember to use your farm drainage plans and product cost sheets. Moving on, here's some quick updates for those of you with abstraction licenses. To reduce the risk of future problems from prolonged dry weather and droughts, you can start planning now how to improve your resilience of your water supplies. For example, consider if you can use the water you abstract more efficiently. Can you change your cropping plans or build a storage reservoir to fill in winter? Or can you buy water from other abstraction licence holders, known as water trading rights? For those of you who already have winter storage reservoirs, start planning now for the summer and make full use of your winter storage while river flows are looking healthy. As the situation in the area has improved over autumn and winter, there's no flexible agreement in place to extend the normal winter abstraction season this year, and we'll continue to review the water resources situation ahead of spring, and we'll be issuing our irrigation prospects at the end of February. Review your abstraction licences now for this summer. Do you know how to comply with them and do they meet your needs? If not, you should apply for a variation now to change them, and don't rely on flexible local arrangements in the summer. Remember to submit your abstraction returns if you haven't already done so. Reminders were sent in December for those who didn't submit returns in the autumn. Even if no water is abstracted, it's still important that a nil return is submitted. And you can now submit your abstraction returns online, but we do still have paper forms available if needed. There's a link on the next slide to the online portal. For help with the online service or returns, please contact our Environment Agency General Inquiries team, and contact details again are on the next slide. The deadline for receiving applications for previously exempt activities, including trickle irrigation, closed last year on the 30th of June. Any abstraction taking place after that date without a valid abstraction application having been submitted by the deadline will be unlawful and will require an application for a new licence. This should be submitted through the normal licensing process before any abstraction can take place. We'll shortly be writing to some licence holders who haven't used their licences for a number of years to ask if they still need them. So retaining an abstraction licence that's no longer needed reduces the water available for those who do need them. It can also present environmental risks if the abstraction restarts. And remember that revoking a licence that you don't need will also save you money. And finally, for those of you in the Idle and Torn catchment, the new abstraction licensing strategy has been published and is available to view on our website. In summary, there's no change to our approach to consumptive licences, but we may issue licences for environmental gain. So if you'd like to know more about that strategy, information on the pressures in the catchment and some of the initiatives that have been taking place, such as the high flow study and groundwater recharge project, you can find a link to it on the next slide. So here are the links where you can get further information on the topics I've just talked about, and you'll also be able to find details on how to contact our General Inquiries team at the bottom of the slide as well. And finally, here's how to contact Graham and myself if you want to get in contact with us directly. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll now hand you over to Laura Flower of the Severn Trent Water.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you very much, Ali. So I'm the Senior Catchment Management Scientist at Severn Trent Water. I cover the whole of Severn Trent region, but I'm going to be focusing on East Midlands today. So I'm going to talk about where we are running our catchment management schemes, what schemes are available, the trials that we are running in the East Midlands, and I'm also going to give a metaldehyde update. So our Farming for Water programme, we work in 44 priority catchments across Severn Trent region, and they're a combination of surface water and groundwater catchments, covering lots of different issues. So we've got pesticides, cryptosporidium, nitrates, colour, phosphate, and we also run schemes for biodiversity across our catchments. We deliver our schemes through Severn Trent Water Agriculture Advisors and 12 partnership advisors through Rivers Trusts and Wildlife Trusts. In total, Severn Trent has 181 groundwater sources and 16 surface water treatment works, which are supplied by rivers and reservoirs. So we're just working in a proportion of those where we've got drinking water quality issues. And then focusing in on the East Midlands region, this map shows the areas where we have our priority catchments and the agricultural advisors which look after those catchments. So we've got the Nottinghamshire boreholes groundwater catchments, and all the rest of them are surface water. So in Derbyshire there's the Derwent, Ogston and Staunton Harold Reservoir, and the Dove, which straddles the Derbyshire-Staffordshire border. And then we also have Cropston in Leicestershire and Avon, which is the Northamptonshire-Leicestershire border. So these are the schemes that we have available in our priority catchments. The ones with yellow stars on I will go into more detail later. So there's our metaldehyde reduction scheme, which we call Farm to Tap, and that's our scheme working with farms in our pesticide priority catchments to reduce metaldehyde runoff. We have our Severn Trent Environmental Protection Scheme, which we call STEPS, where we have grants to address water quality issues, and then we now have biodiversity steps, which are grants to improve biodiversity on farms. We have a brand new scheme called Swap My Nozzles, which we are just launching right now, and I'll go into more details on that later. We run a pesticide amnesty most years, so farmers can dispose of unwanted and unused pesticides through our specialist contractors, and that's all done anonymously. We offer specialist on-farm advice visits currently through our external contractors ADAS and Promar, and they are for specific steps options that you can apply for. We just give some extra advice on those. We also offer pesticide application training to all farmers in our priority catchments, and that just excludes PA1, so all the others. And we've been funding weather stations on farms in our catchments, and then all local farmers can access that data. And we're still looking for more farms to install weather stations on, so just get in touch if you're interested. And then we've got some trials that are running in the East Midlands. Most of these are being led by agriculture providers themselves. So we have phosphate reverse auctions in the Wye and Dove in Derbyshire, and that runs alongside our STEP scheme, targeting phosphate inputs into river systems, so specific STEPS options for that. We have phosphate socks in the Cropston Reservoir catchment, and these are large tubular mesh structures at the edges of fields, and they absorb sediments and phosphates from field runoff. So we're just trialling those and sampling to see how effective they are. In the Avon catchment, we have a soil health trial, which is aiming to create a case study to show farmers how healthy soils can lead to healthy plants. So we're looking at varying cultivation types, fertiliser types, and we're measuring the reduction in required plant protection products with having healthier plants. We are planning to hold an event in the spring to discuss our findings, all COVID dependent. And then two other trials that we're running in the Notts boreholes are undersown maize and cover crops, and I'll come on to those later. And those photos at the bottom are from the fields where we're doing the soil health trial. So you're all probably aware of the Metaldehyde Ban, which is impending. We're in the 18-month use-up period now, and the full ban will come into force next spring. So metaldehyde will be prohibited for outdoor use then. At Severn Trent, we've been working with farms for the past 5 years through our Farm to Tap metaldehyde scheme, aiming to promote sustainable use of the slug pellets, but also alternative control methods to using slug pellets. We've been running the scheme over the 2020 winter. We've been working with about 800 farmers, and the water quality results from that are still being analysed, and they will be sent to farmers along with any payments they're eligible for later this month. We'll be running this scheme for one more time through autumn 2021 in our priority pesticide catchments, and so it'll be the last time before the ban comes into force. Our STEP scheme has been running for quite a few years now, so farmers can apply for up to £5,000 per farm per year on fixed price items, which represents approximately half of the value. So some examples of options are pesticide washdown areas, cover crops, arable field margins, and there's also a farmer innovation option. So any ideas that farmers might have for reducing pollution from their farm. The application window has just closed for the latest round, but we are moving now to a year-round application window, and the opening date of that is to be confirmed, but there will be a limited range of priority water quality items available in this new round. So we will be in touch with farmers in our priority catchments when we have more details, and they will also be available on our website. So here's just a case study. Robin's a farmer in the River Lem catchment in Warwickshire, and he applied for some fencing through the STEPS programme. So he was transitioning from arable to sheep farming. The fencing was going to keep his sheep from the ditches. That's going to be protecting the water from bacteria and nitrates entering the watercourses. And Robin was also inspired to plant trees inside the fence line to create habitats for other species and provide shelter for his sheep. And that leads nicely onto our spring steps for biodiversity grant. And the application window opens on the 22nd of March for these items. And there's just some examples of different options that are available for the biodiversity grants on this slide. So our brand new scheme, Swap My Nozzles, which we're just launching, there's going to be 4 online training events. The training events are aimed at farmers and spray contractors. And we've got Chris Tolley of Chris Tolley Agronomy, who is going to be talking about spraying best practice during these events. There'll be 40 participants per meeting, and we're opening up to our Farm to Tap scheme members first of all. And then if that's successful, we will open it up to all the farmers in our pesticide priority catchments and run the events again in the summer. Anybody that joins the events will receive a full set of low drift nozzles for free and 25% off the second set as well. So that is one of our new schemes to help reduction of pesticides getting into watercourses. So one of our trials that we're running is the maize undersowing trial in Nottinghamshire boreholes area. And this is run by Phil Billings, the advisor in the area. It's been run for a few years now. This year, approximately 200 hectares of maize have been undersown through the STEPS scheme. Findings from the years that we've been running it so far are that undersowing maize harvested in September and early October are working really well. But late harvested maize is proving more difficult as the maize is shading out the grass. We also found that late harvested maize needs undersowing earlier and with a fescue dominated mix. And we've also expanded the trial to look at cover crops reducing nematodes, so specifically looking at planting radishes. So this is a field where we've planted 4 different establishment methods, and then the plan is to strip till digestate in ahead of the maize planting, and that is hopefully that we'll not need to then apply diammonium phosphate at the planting stage as well. The cut downs of the radishes I've shown the different established methods have influenced the amount of nutrient take-up, and where the previous wheat crop failed, the radishes picked up 200 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen. So the plan is to keep on monitoring. In this trial, we're monitoring for nitrates and also for the nematodes, and then after the maize has been harvested, onions will be going into this field, so we'll be looking at the impact of the nematodes on the onions following this crop as well. And then finally, I can't leave you without talking about our Great Big Nature Boost, which hopefully you've seen advertised. And one of the schemes that we are running underneath this is Boost for Biodiversity. And this is open to anyone in the Severn Trent region. And farmers can apply as part of a farmer group. So this is aimed at groups rather than individuals applying for this grant. An area can be from half a hectare to 30 hectares in the application, and it can be anything that you want to apply for that will be improving biodiversity within the Severn Trent region. So just some examples there of things that have been applied for in the past. And the projects have 2 years to be completed. And this it opens up on the 22nd of March, so the same time as our STEPS biodiversity scheme as well. Thank you very much, and here are some contacts of the agriculture advisors in the East Midlands and also my contact details. And I'm now going to hand over to Kelly Hewson-Fisher from Anglian Water.
Hello, the catchment team at Anglian Water have been in place for 6 years now. We're still a small team with 8 of us dotted around the Anglian Water region. The map on the left provides contacts, but do get in touch with me and I can signpost you to the right person. Anglian Water use water from rivers, reservoirs, what we call surface water, and also from boreholes, groundwater. As a generalisation, this is a 50-50 split, and the map on the right very loosely outlines the main surface and groundwater catchments, but again, do get in touch with me and I can give you some more detail. For Anglian Water, the main issue is water quantity and water quality. Surface waters tend to present pesticides above the 0.1 micrograms per litre drinking water standard. And for those of you who have heard me speak before, I like to visualise that 0.1. So looking at it as 1 grain of wheat in 390 tonnes, or 1 stem of hay, or 1 stem of straw in 111,000 bales. So it really is such small quantities that can take us over that 0.1 micrograms per litre. Our groundwaters tend to present nitrates above the 50 milligrams per litre drinking water standard. That's not to say that groundwaters don't see pesticides and surface waters don't see nitrates, but on a day-to-day basis, that's the case. I would now like to take you on a tour of some of the work that we've been doing, some of the projects, and to show you the breadth and depth of work that we cover through the catchment management team here at Anglian Water. If we start with the graph at the top of your screen, these are projects that we've been doing over the last 5 years, many of them in collaboration with the Environment Agency, looking at how we can work with farmers in the agricultural sector to reduce nitrates to groundwaters. The picture in the top corner shows the cover crop trial that we had in place in 2017. The first part of the field is lightly cultivated, allowing weeds to grow. We then had a stubble plot, and we then had 3 different cover crop mixes. The first being mainly oats, the second mainly radishes, and then the third a 10 seed mix. The graph relates to this trial and shows on the grey bar where we've lost 90 kilograms of nitrate per hectare in the stubble plots, down to 60 kilograms per hectare on the blue bar where we lightly cultivated the land and left the weeds to grow. But as we can see, we can reduce this to below 10 kilograms per hectare of nitrate where we've used cover crops. The current project that we've got in the ground at the moment is looking at post peas, so looking at nitrate capture with a catch crop and or a companion crop, drilling winter wheat, observing the nitrate losses through the autumn-winter period, and then looking to see if we can vary the bagged fertiliser in the spring, and then looking at yields of winter wheat. So I'll keep you in touch with those results, or do get in touch if you would like to know more information. If we follow the pictures round, the next picture to the right of your screen shows the demonstration site that we've got at the University of Lincoln. It can be said that 40 to 70% of pesticides that are seen in surface waters tend to come from the farmyard. So anything that we can put in place, mitigation measure to reduce those losses, is a benefit. We've got there a biobed, a biofilter, which is the stacked IBCs, and then the heliosec, which is the sort of caged liner. But anything you can put in place, as I say, is a benefit. We are giving away drip trays for those farmers in our catchments, so do get in touch if you'd like one of those that can go underneath the induction hopper of the sprayer, or you can pop your knapsack in there. Catchment sensitive farming may have funds available, so do get in touch with the catchment sensitive farming officer in your area, or come back to me and I'll signpost you. The next picture down at the bottom with the soil pit really depicts the work that we've been doing with farmers over the years to look at soil health and how we can work together to improve soil health, looking at the 3 elements, the biological, the chemical and the physical. So the biological, we did some work looking at earthworms with Jackie Stroud, and it was said across Lincolnshire that 46% of the fields that we analysed actually failed the earthworm test. Looking at the chemical analysis, we worked with farmers across our whole region, where farmers chose what they perceived to be a poor field and a good field, and we could look at the analysis of each of those and make comparisons, suggestions to go forward. The physical side of things we were due to look at, but COVID unfortunately got in the way, but we hope to pick that up again and work with farmers to look at the physical side of the soil health triangle. If we follow the pictures around in the bottom left-hand corner, this is a trial we've got in place at the moment. We've got 3 sites where we've set up a sediment barrier and a catch pit, which is the polythene liner that you can see there in the picture, and the sediment barrier behind it. And this is really to look at any sediment that's run off a field and any water that runs off fields. We're looking to capture those and analyse them for pesticides and phosphates and phosphorus. So we can look again and see how much would have actually been taken off that field and look at the correct and effective mitigation measures that we can put in place. The next picture going round, so in the middle on the left, is of a weather station. So we have 18 weather stations across the Anglian Water region, looking to provide you with forecasts, spray forecasts, soil moisture deficit information. And if you want to analyse or access the data, should I say, of these, then do get in touch and I can sign you up for that. I use this information quite a lot from here with our risk team and our supply teams, looking at the weather forecast, looking at what's actually being used on the land, and we can then forecast the risk. The last little logo there is our Slug It Out logo. So many of you may have heard of the Slug It Out trial that we've been doing over the years, and again across our region, working with farmers to reduce metaldehyde levels in our waters. In Lincolnshire, we worked with 92 farmers in one catchment and reduced the metaldehyde levels down below the 0.1 micrograms per litre, which is fantastic. And this year, we've been able to use that water source to actually blend with other water sources. So it's been a really important source of water there for us. So the next steps, what can we do to go forward? So you can contact me, my contact details are there, about any of the trials that we've talked about here, any further information that you would require. I mentioned the weather stations, so if you would like to sign up to receive data from those, then please do let me know. You can sign up to our quarterly catchment specific newsletters. These are specifically across Lincolnshire at the moment, but do get in touch if you'd like to know some more information. If you actually farm in one of our priority catchments, as I mentioned, the drip trays, we've had some really excellent feedback of these to be able to pop underneath the induction hopper, and I can send you or drop one of those off for you. We've also got some dye bags like tea bags that you can drop into buckets of water and look at yard and field drainage systems, which have been really useful. And we often have pesticide amnesties. So please do get in touch to see if we've got one local to you. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand you back for a Q&A session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Laura and Kelly. That was a really useful insight into what is on offer from our two water companies in the East Midlands. These are actual examples of, if you like, private sector funds coming into farming for services to improve and protect water quality in return. Could I please ask all the panelists to turn on their cameras and microphones for the Q&A? We've had a lot of questions in, and we'll try and give them an airing. And also thank you to the panelists for answering some of those questions as they came up. It's a useful facility. Short and sweet one first was, if I can find the question now, Andrew, has the 3-crop rule gone forever or just 2021?
Well, we're sure it's gone for 2021. I'm almost 100% certain it's gone forever. DEFRA's strategy has been simplification. George Eustace never liked the rule in the first place. Convinced me personally that he wanted to get rid of it as soon as he could, and indeed he has done that. I don't think we'll see it come back. What will be interesting is to see what details required on this year's BPS applications in terms of crop types when we come to fill that in. But that's for a little bit later this spring. But yeah, I think it's gone.
Good, and I think it will. The idea of a 3-crop rule was very much a European idea. So yeah, we're hopeful we don't see it come back in another form at some future stage in the time. But there's nothing on the deck at the moment. A lot of questions related to the farming rules for water, and in particular the Rule 1 regarding nutrients and crop uptake, which I think is going to be of some concern to quite a few people in the call, in the webinar. Graham usefully outlined the basics of that. Graham, could you maybe just help us with sort of outlining what your plans are around guidance going forward on this?
Well, as with most of these things, it's always rolling forward. The speed of which we roll forward with various things is obviously dictated by what else is going on at the time, and DEFRA are quite busy at the moment with ELM. But yeah, farming rules is a bit of a hot potato at the moment. Obviously, people are coming to terms now the rules have been in since 2018 with some of the changes, and in particular Rule 1 that is moving people even more towards spring applications than the MVZ rules did. So in terms of some of the things that we've talked about, and the likes of Kelly and Laura as well have talked about, in terms of nitrate leaching and pollution, these rules are there to try and also help tackle that a bit better. But it's in the context actually of farmers taking up the mantle themselves to come up with the ideas to stop it happening, and also obviously with the help of the likes of Laura and the Environment Agency and their advisors. So the Rule 1 update came out last year, and that was done with yourselves, Simon, as you know. So we did have NFU input into the actual wording of that guidance. So it is being looked at again at the moment. The rules are on a 3-yearly cycle. So as I said in the presentation, that's just closed for the public consultation end of January. So before the middle of summer, all being well, fingers crossed, and there are enough people to sit down and go through this properly, then yes, hopefully there'll be another update to the regulations. And of course that will take into account some of what I imagine will be quite a lot of negative comment, especially around Rule 1. So obviously that will be focused on more rather than where we've got positive comments, obviously.
Yeah, and I'm aware of an AHDB assessment going on. Have you got details on that? Or
I don't. I can probably find out from head office, but as you can imagine, sometimes it takes a long time to trickle down to my level.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll make a note.
It trickled up to me. AHDB are doing an assessment of the practical and financial impact of the EA's interpretation on this. So watch this space as we go forward. And I do know that as with all the 3-year reviews, obviously NFU's been raising this particular interpretation issue as part of its recent response and discussions with DEFRA, which are ongoing. So it is on the NFU radar. It is causing us some concern because if you can't use these manures and fertilizers in the autumn in response to crop need, then you're going to have problems of storage and going on. So can I just give everybody rest everybody's minds, if you like, on this, that the matter is in the thick of it, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you've not got to forget, of course, there's the MVZ closed period, so we still have to comply with all those rules anyway. So you know, a lot of this isn't new, shall we say, to most people. Maybe for the likes of the sewage undertakers, who also traditionally have been autumn spreaders, they're now starting to see the effects of it and starting to plan accordingly. So they're looking into storage, and also they're going to be. I'd imagine there'll have been quite a lot of inputs into the consultation from the sewage undertakers as well.
And just a bit of a follow-up, Charles Skelton asked a query about, in the light of recent watercourse flooding events, how do what accounts for reasonable planning and application of manure and fertilizer on arable crops that subsequently become submerged by floodwater? How do you deal with this in the EA?
Well, I guess if people are certainly in an MVZ are doing their risk assessments, which they have to for MVZ anyway. I mean, most people will know which fields traditionally start becoming waterlogged first and work their way through the fields. And sadly, you know, it's another winter of wetness, isn't it? So using their risk assessments, they should be able to look at which parts of the fields they don't want to fertilise, bearing in mind what might be happening coming into the winter, and maybe leave off till conditions are right in the spring and do some later fertilising if that's possible. It depends on the crop, of course, what's in the ground, but yes, it's all about obviously at that planning stage thinking about worst case scenarios, and we talked quite a lot last year about contingency planning. So it all comes into this thinking about what if, rather than oh crikey, I spread muck last week, and now it's tipped it down for 3 days, and it's all going to get washed off, which economically is not good for the farmer anyway, is it? So, you know, it's
No.
wasted money.
No. Good. Thank you for that, Graham. Just moving on then. Sorry, have we still got Laura in the call, or we lost Laura? I can't see her on the panelists. Right, Laura's dropped out, hopefully rejoined. Well, just Kelly, I know you can't answer for Severn Trent. There was a query in here. Why haven't Anglian Water got the same schemes as Severn Trent? Different companies, different policies, I gave as an answer. You might like to expand on that a bit.
Yeah, I saw your answer there, Simon. Thank you very much. And that's exactly right. Yeah, different companies, different policies, but the main drivers really are different issues. So as Severn Trent said, a lot of their areas are groundwaters, which present different issues themselves. Whereas, you know, we're 50-50 split across our region. With regard to sort of geographical area, we're on the east coast, and majority of land is used for, you know, agricultural arable land, and so Metaldehyde has driven a lot of our work over the last sort of 5 years. As Laura mentioned, with the Metaldehyde ban, you know, our drivers will change as we see less of that coming through. But certainly, as you say, different issues for different water companies based on geographical and land use needs.
Thank you. And that really just helping, without Laura in the call, questions from Alison Bassett, for example, and Ben Jackson there. Not so easy to answer, but hopefully that gives you an insight. And I know, Alison, on the question of the STEPS grants being open for such a short period and how will they be advertised, I know that we have regular meetings now with the team at Severn Trent who oversee that. And certainly we're going to sharpen up the way in which we make sure people are aware of the availability of these grants, which can be quite helpful. Just looking down through the questions, Claire Leggett highlighted her concern about being able to spread organic manures and tries to store them very carefully, as you should do, away from ditches, away from everything else and land drains, etc. But wet weather has reduced the time options to spread. Can penalties be enforced if I cannot spread within 12 months? Graham.
Storage and the spreading is two different things. I think, Laura, what I would say was, yes, there are rules on storage, and it's like most things with the environmental regulations, it's 12 months. What I would say is, if it's a temporary field heap, the rules allow you to move that temporary field heap right next to where it currently is. So it might be that, depending on the size of it, of course, that you may be able to just use a shovel or bucket or whatever just to move it along, so it's not on the same actual footprint as that previous 12 months. So what I would say though is, if you are close to watercourse, it is better to move it as far away as possible, obviously. But if you'd like some further advice, obviously get in touch with us, and we can speak to you afterwards and discuss it. If you've got photos or whatever, we can have a chat about that. And
a sort of cheeky one, because the EA has responsibilities across flood risk management and mitigation. What are your thoughts with regards to land which is waterlogged for longer due to EA flood management decisions and limitations this produces for application? Is that a get out of jail card?
Well, it might be for me, because I don't cover the flooding side of things particularly, so I don't know the latest on our flood risk and management information.
The question from Matt Robinson, he farms in the Welland Valley, so yeah, he's in the floodplain, if you like.
It's a bit out of my patch, that, I'm afraid, but
a bit out of your depth. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, what I would say about flooding though is it might be an exciting time to be flooded, if that sounds bonkers, but with ELM around the corner, there's talk of help for farmers who are being flooded to actually be paid potentially to actually use that flooded land for storage. So there might actually be a positive of sort coming out of it. But yeah, the Welland I can't comment on, unfortunately, because it's outside my area. I don't know if Ali covers that area, but I don't know anything about the water management there, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you for that, Graham. What I'm going to propose to do is actually draw stumps at this stage and move to close the webinar. I know we haven't answered all the questions on there, but we will endeavour to come back to those we didn't get answers to in the near future. So with our time nearly out, I need to bring the discussion to a close. Thank you very much to everyone who asked the question. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all. I'd like to bring your attention to the details that's displayed on the screen of other key support groups around the East Midlands region. In these more challenging times of change in the farming community, there is help available from several sources, which are up on the screen now. These are the main farming helplines across the region: Lincolnshire Rural Support Network, Nottinghamshire Rural Support, FCN and RABI. Whether it's others who need help or maybe yourself, it is good to talk, so please use these services provided. The last slide has details on how to claim your basis and Neroso points. We will leave this up for a few minutes so that you can note the detail down, or I suggest you maybe take a screenshot or a picture with your mobile. It is up to you to actually make the claim, but there are 3 points going begging. Just to remind participants, we'll be sending out the slides from today and a link to the webinar recording. There will also be a link to a Survey Monkey, a very quick questionnaire just to give us a bit of feedback on how you found the webinars. If I may give a plug for part 2 of our virtual Green Futures 2021 webinars. That one takes place on the 9th of February, 1 week today. And you do need to have registered separately for that one. We will send the link with the slides and the recording. Part 2 looks at the future environmental opportunities for your business. There are lots of policy changes on the horizon, some of them starting this year. So speakers from the NFU and CLA will look at the Agricultural Transition Plan and ELMS. Emily Norton from Savills is going to look at private funding of ecosystem services and the opportunities in that emerging market. And from Water Resources East, the Managing Director, Robin Price, will be looking at what I call optimising regional water resources, which is obviously with the recent rainfall, the weather patterns we're getting quite pertinent. Before we close, I'd just like to thank our speakers today, Andrew, Graham, Ali, Laura and Kelly. I'm sure you will agree that this has helped us get up to speed on some of these key aspects of managing our resources. I'd also like to mention and thank the backroom technical support team today, Emily Rose Debenham and Ali Stone from the CLA Eastern region, who have done an awful lot of work to coordinate these webinars, coordinating the speakers, done all the recordings and run the live event this afternoon. Thank you to you both. And last but least, a big thank you to you, the webinar audience, for your participation today. We have had 220 farmers actually in the call, some 276 were registered. This is a very pleasing figure and helps to make today a big success. Thank you all and good afternoon.